today.
All right, the time is 5:45. Call this meeting of the Newark City Council Finance Committee to order. Members present are Mr. Lang, Mr. Bubb, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Costa, and myself, Mr. Blake. We do have some items on our agenda this evening, and the first piece of legislation is to consider resolution number 1820, appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation. And section 1 is dealing with $9,800 for termination of sick pay. And I see Director Baum's at the podium.
Yes, sir. So last week I was here for a vacation and termination comp. It took us a minute to calculate the sick for a resigning firefighter. So I'm here today for the termination sick time in the amount of $9,800.
Any questions or comments for Director Baum?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Bubb. Second, Mr. Frazier. Any other questions or comments?
I have one. So is this it?
This is it.
Okay.
We've done vacation and comp. Now we've done sick. We're good.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, there's a motion and a second. All in favor of send this on to full council, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Baum. The second section is hereby an appropriation of unappropriated balance of the 100 general fund in the amount of $660,000 and $667. Our auditor, Mr. Johnson, is at the podium. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The first night of our marathon sessions, I guess.
Yes, it is.
The city's very fortunate this year that we have a very large unappropriated balance in the general fund. It's about $761,000. And normally we track the unappropriated balance on a spreadsheet because it's substantially smaller than this most years. However, with the size of this, I feel we should put it in our cash reserve account for a couple of reasons. First of all is transparency, and secondly is this will greatly improve our bond rating, because one of the things the rating agency always seem to be concerned about is our anemic reserve balance. So this will probably, what it'll do is it'll increase the cash reserves up to almost $800,000. So all we're doing here is just appropriating $500,000 of this and moving it to budget stabilization where it will remain. Now, it's just like it's when it's unappropriated. It takes council action to do anything with it. So rather than appropriating it from the unappropriated balance, you would be appropriating it from budget stabilization. It's just that it's in the ledger at that point and on into a budget stabilization. The second thing is, of this unappropriated balance, the mayor would like to transfer $100,000 into capital improvements to be earmarked for street paving. Now, that appropriation would come later. This will just move it to capital improvements. The third amount, $60,667, will be to pay off a $91,000 note that the city took out last year to repair a fire engine. This is a very small note. There's no reason to renew that note when we have the cash to pay it off. We already have $31,000 appropriated in the budget. This will just be the additional $60,000 needed to retire it.
Any questions or comments for our auditor?
I'll make a motion.
A motion by Mr. Frazier. Second by Mr. Bubb.
I have a question.
Mr. Frazier.
So is it increased tax revenue that we got in that accounts for this extra money, or?
I believe so. I've talked to the tax administrator several times about this, and she really can't point to any specific thing, but I think probably from all the construction that has gone on in the past year has a significant impact on it. But like I've been telling people, our office tracks tax revenue after we get it.
Yeah.
So bringing it into the treasuries, the treasurer and the income tax departments, I don't know really a lot about that, but I was inquiring, and that's what I've heard, so that seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
I can probably make a couple comments on that. As we roll into a budgeting process, we usually in about October, we have to kind of put a line in the sand of what we're projecting, and do that on a conservative fashion so we don't push out a budget that we're not able to meet, an expense budget. So these, obviously with people filing extensions, and then you have a lot of business in the tax office in the last quarter of the year sometimes. That's exceeded. Yes, I mean, it's a continuation of what Auditor Johnson said. It's predominantly tax collections that were unexpected to this level. We collect clear up to December 31st. I've always said, as you guys have heard me say, if we could do a budget after the close at 4:30 p.m. on December 31st, it'd be the most accurate budget next year, but obviously can't do it in that short time frame. So this is just excess collections. We did have, I want everybody to put in your mind, we're putting good money into budget stabilization. Needed. We had to dip into that a couple years ago for budget, so this is a good thing. But on the other side, we had a very busy January this year in safety forces, and that will put a little taxing stress on our overtime budgets in those. Still early in the year to see where that's going to play out, but you never know where we may need a little bit of money, so it's not maybe as much. That's why the $100,000 maybe for paving. I think there's plenty of room for that. We can get that and use that, and our engineer can plug that in for this coming paving year, but that's why it wasn't a higher number.
Yeah, and that paving number is for the 2018 paving projects that came before us before to kind of help finance that.
Correct. And it was the stick or the ladder truck ladder end 2 that had renovation. If you remember, we said it was better to do a $90,000 renovation on it, a rebuild, than to buy a new one. Obviously, a lot less money. And as Auditor Johnson said, you don't refinance $60,000 when you have money to pay it. It wouldn't be good responsibility to set there fiduciary wise and pay interest on money that you have. So, anyways, that was the thought. Okay.
Steve, what was the number for the budget stabilization with this transfer?
I think it's right around, I thought I wrote it down, but I guess I didn't. It's right around $800,000.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? Questions, comments from the audience? We have a motion and a second. All in favor of moving this on to full council, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Judge.
We have section 3. It's hereby an appropriation of the unappropriated balance of the 422 debt service fund in the amount of $111,000, $662.22. Auditor Johnson.
Last year, we rolled some higher interest bonds into a new bond issue known as a refunding issue. And there were principal and interest payments due in December. The paying agent, we pay a paying agent and they satisfy the bond requirements. They did not invoice us for an existing December principal and interest payment. Apparently they thought that the whole thing was paid off. They didn't have to include that. Well, they did have to include it, and they recently invoiced us. So this is money that we had last year to make that final payment, and it just needs to be appropriated again just to keep our financial train running on the tracks.
Motion.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bub, second Mr. Frazier. Any questions, comments from the committee? Mr. Frazier.
Do we get penalized for not paying at all, or is it because...
No. I think actually the bank went ahead and paid it. They're just trying to collect from us now. Yeah, it's just like a little low interest loan there for a few months. But we're fortunate we do have the money, and like I said, it was just when you do a refunding issue, a lot of things have to fall into place, and it gets confusing. And I know that doing our financials for year end, this refunding issue really caused us to have to do a lot of extra work that I would have preferred not to have done.
And we initially rolled this over into these funds, and now we're just paying it.
Exactly, yeah. It's money we owed anyway, it's just, we're just not paying it.
Any further questions or comments from the committee? Questions, comments from the audience? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of moving this on to full council, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your time. We do have a late item on our agenda. I believe Mr. Moorhead's going to speak to this, and then Mr. Marmee and Mr. Cost will have to decide to bring it before council. So it is to discuss resolution number 1821, authorizing the mayor to make application to and enter into agreements with the Ohio Department of Transportation State Infrastructure Bank for a loan in the amount of $2,717,000 $1,728 for the Ohio Street and Manning Street Bridge Rehabilitation, Ohio Street Bike Path Construction Projects, authorizing the execution of all documents necessary to effectuate the same and declaring an emergency. Late item, go ahead and talk about it, Mr. Moorhead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This came to me on Friday, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it on the regular committee agenda. But this is basically just a piece of legislation to allow us to sign all the agreements and enter into the SIB loan for this project. A couple of weeks ago, I was before you with the final legislation that actually goes to ODOT for the project, but this would just allow us to enter into the loan documents. We had, so Friday I got the word that we've been basically approved for the application, and so this is to allow us to finalize things out. It would be important that we have this passed at the March 19th meeting as an emergency, and March 20th I would plan on taking all the signed documents over to ODOT, and the bid opening for the project is actually scheduled for March 22nd, so they will close it before the March 22nd bid opening time, and we'll be on the right track then. So any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Mr. Frater.
So next steps, as far as like when the project actually breaks ground. Can you walk us through that?
Well, ODOT will open the bids on March 22nd. It typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to award the project, get the pre-construction meeting for the contractor. So I would guess they wouldn't start work until beginning or mid-May, something like that.
This calendar year?
Yes, it'll go through this calendar year then, construction on both of those.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Questions, comments from the audience? Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Cost and Mr. Morrow, we'll talk about getting it on the agenda for next time. So.
Thank you.
With that concludes the business of Finance Committee. Up next is Service.
I'm going to bring the Service Committee meeting to order. We have Mr. Lang, we have Mr. Bob, Mr. Blake, Mr. Labutus sitting in, myself. We're going to consider Ordinance 18-03, an ordinance annexing certain territory generally described as being 33.533 acres more or less, located in the Newark Township, the city of Newark, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Who's going to speak to this?
I think we're going out of order on the agenda there. Or are we going to 1802 first?
No, 1802 was pulled.
Oh, was it? Okay.
There was
I got the wrong one.
a revision sent out. Service Director Rhodes?
Mr. Chair, we're just moving some property from Newark Township into the city.
I'll make a motion.
Second. Motion by Mr. Bubb, second by Mr. Labutus. Is that correct? What questions do we have in the committee for Mr. Rhodes? Mr. Rhodes, can I assume this is the land just north of the schools? Is that correct?
That's correct. It borders King Road by the Evans Athletic Complex, owned by the foundation.
And what is there a specific reason for to be expedited?
Timing. Just timing. Notification, things of that nature.
Okay, do we have a certain deadline or?
I'll have to go back to my email, but
Yes, we did.
yeah.
We had statutorily imposed deadlines for acting. If we don't act, we lose our opportunity to do so.
Thank you, sir.
I like that. Hey, Bill, did you hear him?
Any questions or any other comments on the
Out of
audience?
nowhere. Yes, we do.
Can we do that more often? That was good.
I'm not used to having him here. Any other questions or comments out of the audience? Okay. All those in favor of forwarding this on to council, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Chairman.
that's all we have for service. Thank you.
I'd like to call this Service Committee meeting to order. Present are Mr. Blake, Mr. Fennell, Mr. Frazier, myself, and sitting in for Mr. Rath and Mr. Lang. We have an ordinance for number 18-04, an ordinance amending Chapter 454 and Chapter 407 of the codified ordinances of the City of Newark, Ohio, regarding the regulation of parking vehicles in the downtown area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After we took a further look at what was passed by council, we thought there should be just a little tweak, and that tweak comes off of Church Street in between 3rd and 4th to Locust. That area was designated as an 11-hour area, and we believe that ought to be a 2-hour area also, just again from Church Street to Locust on 3rd and 4th. We didn't feel as though that people should be parking there for 11 hours. So that's the reason for bringing this back, and that's the only change from what was passed by City Council.
Take call for a motion.
Motion.
Second. Frazier. Frazier, second by Lang. Any questions from the committee?
So, just to clarify, it's section C is the only change?
That's the only change.
Okay.
Everything else remains the same.
Final version?
Well, what I would like to say is this is a document that can be changed about any time. It's been changed. I think the law director found maybe 11 different versions of this since he's come into office of the parking. It seems like the parking in downtown is
a fluid topic.
Yeah, and apt to be changed. But this is one we thought that should be changed because that would create 11-hour parking zones down those two streets, and we felt that was not our intent.
Any other questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair, Director Rhodes, I'm just curious, how's since we have adopted and now we're kind of revising it, what's been the reaction from like DNA and other?
Positive. It's been good. We've not started enforcement. If you look around, we have begun to change signs out. We did that last weekend. I had the guys come down on a Saturday and Sunday and do that. We've got a few more signs ordered. Director Baum and I met with Marcia Phelps today, the clerk, and we're working out some of the technology issues so the guns will actually upload any tickets that are given. And we'll let people know when we start to enforce.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Same sign. Motion passes 5-0. With that, this adjourns our Evening Safety Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.